If you're a software engineer sitting in a corporate job right now, thinking about starting a business, the advice that you're getting is almost entirely wrong. Because here's what nobody is telling you. Business does not reward the same things that software engineering rewards. And the mental model that you are currently running as a software engineer, the one that made you a great developer, is the same exact thing that is actually keeping you stuck. And I know this because I lived it. I spent years climbing the corporate ladder, making it to manager, and then quitting and building things that nobody asked for, writing code that nobody paid for, and wondering what I was doing wrong. Fast forward to today, I run a 7-figure B2B AI consulting firm called AB Analytics in the heart of Los Angeles. And I also work with dozens of developers all across the world in my startup accelerator, Code to CEO, helping them with the same exact transition from code to CEO. And no, this video isn't going to be some motivational speech about how you should just take the leap. I've been in a code base, I've shipped products myself, and I've also sat across from clients and closed multi 5, 6, 7-figure deals. And what I'm going to give you is what actually changes when you learn how to do both: fulfill and close clients. Now, over the past decade, I've gone through 4 distinct phases as a developer building businesses. I'm going to compress all of it, every single mistake, every single breakthrough, every single lesson that I had to pay for, into the next 20 minutes. And the last phase, that's the one that separates the developers who freelance from the developers who actually build real companies. So let's get straight into it. Now, the first thing that I had to unlearn came directly out of multiple failed launches. This was in the beginning of my career, shortly after having quit my 9-to-5, meaning that I had not seen any entrepreneurial success yet. And when you come from an engineering background, you've been trained on a very specific loop. Somebody gives you a spec, could be a Jira ticket, right? You build the thing from the spec or the Jira ticket, and then you ship the thing. And you get pretty good at it. And that loop works extremely well inside a company. That's how a company stays profitable, and that's how you are able to contribute to the company. But business runs that loop in reverse. So in business, the order is as follows. You validate first, you sell second, and then you build third. And every developer that I have talked to hears this, and their brain kind of just flinches. How do you sell something that doesn't exist yet? And that's not skepticism. I mean, that's a solid reflex to have. In engineering, selling something unbuilt kind of feels dishonest. It pretty much violates something you were trained on your entire life. But in business, selling something unbuilt is just called validation. And if you skip that step, that's how you end up with what I call a graveyard. What is a graveyard, you might ask? Well, take a look at yourself. How many dead side projects do you have right now? And be honest with yourself. 2, 4, 8, over 10, right? Maybe even more than 15, every single one of those side projects died of the same exact thing. Not because you didn't know how to code, not because your timing was off, it was all because you had no customers before launch. And that is it. And we keep calling these things MVPs, right? And fundamentally, what I learned was that framing these as an MVP does actual real damage. An MVP is not a product, and it shouldn't be treated like one. Think of it more so like a question, and the question is, will somebody actually pay me for this? If you built a product before you got that answer, well, you didn't build an MVP because that's not the minimum viable product, right? You simply built an assumption, okay? A really well-engineered assumption, but that assumption was never tested. Nobody asked for that assumption. That's why a lot of software engineers have a graveyard of soft projects that never go anywhere. So the first thing you need to do is as follows. Stop starting with the build. You need to start with the sale, okay? Your job trained you to solve problems that somebody else found and handed you on a ticket. But business actually rewards you for finding problems on your own. And in particular, problems that nobody else has really named yet. And these are a completely different set of skills. So the reason you feel like you're behind is because nobody told you that that's the case. But there is one thing here. Even once I figured out the sort of reversed loop, even once I stopped building first and actually started talking to people, understanding pain points, gathering different pain from all the people I talked about, I still almost blew it. Because selling, as it turns out, has its own set of traps, especially for a software engineer who's introverted and a little shy around people. And these are specifically designed to catch smart people like software engineers. And guess what smart people often not do? You guessed it, it's validate. And validation, another key point here, only counts when money actually changes hands. Now, this one actually hurt because I had been collecting feedback for months when I started the business. Showing the next thing to people, getting legitimate positive reactions from friends, family, just any acquaintances. They would say, this is cool, I'd use this, you should definitely launch this, oh man, this is gonna be a big hit. And all of these felt like progress, genuinely. But at the end of the day, they turned out to mean pretty much nothing because I did not make any money from those things. And the hard thing to accept is that everybody is trained from childhood to simply be polite in our society. If somebody sends you something that they build and asks you what you think of it genuinely, you're going to find something kind to say about said thing. And that's just the social wiring that we're living in. But a credit card or hard cash bypasses all of it. Cash is the only honest signal you actually have. And it's the only thing that goes beyond the social conditioning and the social norms of trying to be kind. And once I actually accepted that, the next thing hit me. Okay, I now actually have to sell something. And that's where I froze. Because selling, when you have never done it, feels extremely gross. To me, it kind of felt like begging. It feels like you're being that one sales bro that you keep seeing on the internet. But here's what actually took me embarrassingly long to figure it out that solved that entire problem. That feeling actually comes from leading with yourself. What do I mean by that? Well, when I take a look back at pretty much every single outreach I wrote, be it a cold email, a cold DM, anything that I wrote that killed my early pipeline, and let me tell you, I sent a lot of that outreach initially. I had about 15 to 14 sentences of these outreach starting with I built this, I did that, I can do this, I have experience in this. Nobody's reading past line 3. They simply don't care. The only thing people care about are their own problems and their own situation. And that's simply the reality. So the flip is actually pretty simple. You need to lead with your situation and not necessarily your resume. So an example would be, I noticed your company is doing X and most companies in your space quietly lose money on Y. Well, if you do something like that, now they're interested because you just described their actual pain point. So this is really the second realization, is that it's not about me, it's all about the customer. It's all about them. And here's something I really want you to hear, because most developers don't actually believe it until they've tried it. For all this to work, you don't need an audience. You don't need a personal brand to get clients. You don't need a big following. You don't need a content strategy. All you really need is one conversation with the right person. And that is the entire formula over here. All you need is one yes, and everything begins to work. And yes, cold email works, cold DMs work, advertisements work, everything works. But most developers never actually try either of them because it feels uncomfortable, or they simply don't give it enough reps. And that discomfort is genuinely your entire competitive advantage. Because think about it, every single engineer who decides that they could never do outreach has self-selected out of the game entirely. So the field now becomes wide open. You don't have any competition. Okay, so at this point in time, I thought I had it pretty much figured out for the most part. I mean, I had most of the framework down. I was talking to real people, money was changing hands, I was creating real momentum, and you'd think that the hard part was now over, right? But it actually wasn't. In fact, it was just getting started, because the next phase was a trap, and one that was specifically built for people like you and me. People who are very, very good at thinking, and sometimes overthinking. Smart people are the world's best rationalizers. I spent months building a completely logical, evidence-based case for why I needed one more feature before launch, one more credential before I was credible enough, one more testimonial before I could put it on a website, one more round of research before I started outreach. And this information spiral truly became the worst version of this. I read every business book, watched every Hermosi video, watched anything I could get my hands on, took every course, paid a lot of money, and I want to be honest about what happened. The gap between what I knew and what I was actually doing, it pretty much stayed the exact same thing. Information did not close that gap at all. So understand that at a certain point, you just have to accept that. that it's not about consuming more information, but it is all about execution. Because what actually closed was two things, and neither of them are a productivity system or another video that you're going to be watching. I realized that when accountability is real and the stakes are real, you begin to move. Sure, maybe not perfectly, one would even say a little messy, but you still move. And at the early stage, moving beats perfect every single time. Execution and speed is the most important thing. The developers who build real companies are not necessarily the ones with the best products, the best marketing, or even the best sales. They're the ones who get to a paying customer the fastest. And I know that makes some of you uncomfortable, but that's good. That's the right reaction to have, because that means you actually heard what I just said. A lot of you might have the objection, why would somebody buy from me? Why would somebody buy my product? Maybe because you are the first to their ear and they have not heard of the competition yet. So you need to build the ugliest version of whatever it is that solves a particular problem. Get it in front of somebody with a credit card or a means to pay you and iterate that based on what they tell you, not what you assumed they need or not what you assumed they would say. Now, everything I just told you, right? The reverse loop, the real validation, the execution trap, all of that gets you successfully from zero to some revenue. But it still does not fundamentally get you from revenue to a real business, because all you are now is just a glorified freelancer. And the real gap between those two things, well, that's where almost every single developer founder that I know gets permanently stuck. So here's what's actually on the other side. And understand that I was wrong about this for years. I thought initially that the game of entrepreneurship was this. I become genuinely excellent at building certain things, and the money is eventually going to follow, because if I build something really, really good, people are gonna like it and more people are gonna come to me. But it does not actually work that way. It sounds logical, but that's not the way the world works. Here's the actual game and the way the world works. Right now, you're probably describing yourself as a developer, right? You probably say, I build software, I build AI systems, I build apps, and that's fine because sure, that is what you do, but that also describes about 3 million other people that do exactly what you just said. So all you really described was a commodity. And guess what? Commodities compete on price. So you will always be racing somebody on Upwork who's simply going to charge less because their cost of living at a different country is less. So what you need to do is actually change the frame. And let's see what happens when we reframe that entire interaction. Instead of saying I build websites or I build apps, you say something specific. For example, I help logistics companies stop losing $80,000 a year to manual data entry. Now, all of a sudden, what you just described is an outcome. The other one was maybe a service you were offering, but now you're describing an outcome. And with an outcome comes a real conversation, and at the end of that conversation, there's a price associated with it. But here's the actual insight. The one I didn't actually fully understand until way later in my business career. Your technical skills are pretty much going to be the entry fee. They are not going to be the differentiator. Everybody that you're competing with currently can also code, and AI is making that more true every single month. But that's not meant to necessarily scare you. It's rather pointing you directly towards the only thing that yet cannot be commoditized. Now, what is that, you might ask? Well, let me give you a scenario. Can you sit across from a non-technical CEO who does not know what an API is, understand what problem that he or she is describing, and then translate that into something buildable, right? And then turn around and explain it to your dev team, what needs to get built, how, and why it matters specifically to the business. As of this moment, can you do that? Because if not, that's the skill that I'm talking about. And I call it being a business translator. You essentially speak business and you're able to speak code. And there are almost none of these types of individuals on the planet. Very, very few. Very few software engineers who are able to connect the non-technical to the technical. Because the business people can't build properly, and most developers can't sell and can't communicate the value of what they do. But if you can do both, understand you don't have to be the best. You simply just have to be both. And the market becomes yours by default because there's so few individuals who are able to do both. And once you see yourself this specific way, your current job actually begins to look different too. Understand that your employer is not your partner. Think of them as your customer. And right now, they are your only customer. So 100% of your revenue comes from one source, one customer. And I'm sure you've probably thought at some point, especially if you wanted to build a business as a software engineer, that depending on a single customer for all of your revenue is relatively risky. And you know this, but have you actually ever actively applied it to yourself and your situation right now? Most likely not. So that was it, the 4 specific shifts: the reversed loop, the real validation, the execution trap, and the business translator. Understand that you are not bad at business. You are simply running a mental model that was never designed for it in the first place. The developers that I have watched go the furthest are not the best coders in the room. They are simply the ones who learned how to find the problem, sell the solution, and build the thing properly. In a world where AI is making code cheaper every single month, that combination is getting rarer and more desirable and valuable at the same exact time. A great example of this is actually Sandra, an MIT grad from Boston and one of our founders from Code to CEO. When she just joined, she was juggling 2 jobs, overemployed at the time, and she had never sold anything in her life before she came in. In fact, when she came in, she said she doesn't want to touch sales, all she wants to do is code. And go and behold, less than a year later, she was able to successfully quit both jobs and make more money with a business than both of the previous jobs combined, while having more time freedom and being able to travel whenever she wants. And let me tell you something, she did not get there because she had some insane advantage over you or the other developers. She got there because she applied all the things that I talked about in this particular video. And if you want to learn the specifics as to how Sandra managed to acquire these particular clients for her business, I will be breaking down the exact method to acquire clients as a software engineer on March 29th, 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. This is going to discuss the same exact client acquisition method that generated over $10 million in pipeline for myself alongside all the other founders inside Code to CEO. It's completely free, register in the link down below. As always, thank you so much for watching and have a good one.